Please welcome Andrew Moir.
Okay. Hi, guys. My name is Andrew, and I'm a senior design manager at the Hyundai Design Center here in Irvine. I've got a presentation. It's kind of just a bunch of pictures of stuff, projects I've worked on, and I'll talk through them and explain kind of what the story is, because Max suggested that I do my sort of design journey, but it's more of the design story is what I want to talk about. So it's because for me, the stories are are a really big part of it. So let me just, with that, I will start sharing my screen. So I'll do this first. Okay, so this is my design story. So I want to talk about stories because really that's all design is. You're making an object and trying to get somebody to buy it, and the way you get them convinced that this is what they want is by telling a story. And your product contains a little story, and you want to get somebody interested in the story enough that they want to be connected to your product. So my story starts with cars. I've been a car nut since I was a kid. There's a picture of me in the snow with my toy Range Rover. My mom said, I think one of my first words was car and snow, which as a hint is that I actually come from Canada. So my story started in Ontario. I'm going to go through this because everybody has a story and a mythology about who they are, and how you tell them what you tell about who you are and where you come from is a part of you. And so for me, part of my story is that I'm Canadian. Part of my story is that I'm now American, and part of my story is my parents were immigrants to Canada from Scotland, and so I'm also Scottish. So I'm a bit of everything, and I've moved around, and I've lived different places, and all of that becomes a part of me. So I was born near Toronto in Canada, in a town called Hamilton. When I was about we moved actually a few times within Ontario, and then when I was about four and a bit, we actually moved to Afghanistan. So this is obviously not the Afghanistan that we know and hear about in the news today. This is going back about 40 years ago, in the mid 70s. So it was actually quite a stable place, and we lived there for a couple of years. Although by the end of the time we were there, not so stable. So there was actually a coup d'etat there, and there were jets shooting out shooting buildings a few hundred meters away from where we lived. So it was a little exciting, more for my parents than me. I just thought it was cool seeing tanks on the street and hearing jets, and I sat there just drawing pictures of cars all the time because that's what I did. So we then moved back to Canada, back to the same province, Ontario, and we lived there for a few years, and then we moved out to Western Canada, and we lived there for a few years, and then we moved back to Ontario again. And I finished up high school in Toronto, and I was obsessed with becoming a car designer. And having a British passport, it was going to be easier to go and work in Europe than it was in the States. And being Canadian, we all hate Americans, so I didn't really have any desire to come to America. So I went off and lived in England for 3 years, and I was studying there, which was a really interesting experience because I was there in a big university, and there were lots of other foreign students. There were lots of English students, and ostensibly I would have more in common with the English students because I'd been there many times. It was the common language, and that's what I'd grown up doing that. But we actually I had in common with all the other foreign students the fact that we were not English in common. So we ended up the people I had more in common with and hung out with were other foreign students. But I decided after being there for a few years and actually going to the motor show in Detroit at Christmas one year and seeing the work from CCS, which I'd already known about, but I as I said, was more interested in the work options in Europe. I decided that this was the place for me. And when I toured the school, they had a lab full of computers with Alias on it, which was something I was very interested in, and which Coventry, where I was at school in England, only had one seat. So I thought this seemed like a good place for me. So I moved to Michigan, where I met Max. And I was at school for 4 years there. And I while I was studying, because I transferred a bunch of credits from actually high school in Canada, which you could do at the time, and from Coventry. By my fourth year, I didn't have many classes, and I was working for Alias, the software company, most of the time. So I got a really good experience and understanding of the digital design process, as we call it now. I got to work inside the studios of Ford, GM, Chrysler, showing off software, working with designers and people there, even as a student, which was pretty exciting. I then was hired straight out of school by Mercedes-Benz to come to California. So I flew out here for an interview, and they offered me a job. And this is the first time I'd ever been to California. And I had not even remotely considered moving here, because being a Canadian, I didn't think I was going to have any ability to work here. But it sort of worked out, and I got a work visa, and I started working there. And I worked there for a total of a little over 7 years, a couple of which I spent actually in Germany, which was really interesting, because it was a totally different experience working in the mothership, a big studio with thousands of people connected to the factory and the R&D center, and you had all the engineers there. And so working on a production car, I'd have the meetings with the engineers and sitting arguing with them in German about what I wanted to do and how it should work, and really managed to affect the product directly, compared to the satellite studio in California, where you send stuff off and it would go into the ether, and sometimes you get a result and sometimes you would get nothing. So it was really a really interesting experience. I then came back to California, where I am still. And I worked, for another, year or so, a couple of years at Mercedes after that. And then I went to work at Hyundai in 2004. And so I've been there since then. So it's like 17 years this month. And it's been really interesting because, compared to the Mercedes studio in California, the Hyundai one was much more of a production studio. We actually worked on cars that would go into production. So we were doing advanced work, we're doing production work. We travel to Korea a lot and see what's going on there at the studio there. So it's been a really interesting experience. And now we've been for the last 18 months working at home due to COVID. So instead of going to Korea once every other month or so, 6-7 times a year usually, I now have meetings with Korea all the time at night. In fact, I have one today at 9 o'clock after we're done here. I have a video conference with Korea. So that's my background and that's my story. It's where I've come from and where I've been, and it affects everything I do. So now we're going to talk about, I'll give you a little bit of a overview of where I work since I'm here in California. So that's an overview of the studio. You can, you know, there's a little bit of everything that we do there, and as you can see right now, it's a bit empty. We've been out of there for, as I said, 18 months. The only people who are in there full time right now are our clay modelers, because obviously they can't work remotely. But all of the the office staff, the designers, the cast modelers, and everybody else is working from home offices right now. So we've packed up all our big workstations. I've got a big tower computer and a 49-inch monitor and the VR goggles sitting at an old dining room table in a spare bedroom in my house. So that's where we are, and that's Hyundai today. So for the main part of what I want to show you, I wanted to talk about the story, and the pitch is a big part of it. So what's the pitch? What's the hook? If I show you this slide, anybody seeing the one picture, anybody who knows anything about cars knows exactly what car that is. And even if there wasn't a picture, even if there was none of the car showing in that picture, I'm sure most of you who've seen any of these movies know exactly what kind of car it is. It's obviously an Aston Martin DB5, and James Bond's driving it. So, and you have that because of one man, not the guy on the left. On the one on the right is Ian Fleming. He's the author of the book. So he had the ideas, it was the idea and the story and the pitch of this suave secret agent with all of the stuff that you could dream of, and that sucks you in. And that's why we're still seeing James Bond movies 60 years after the first one. So what does this have to do with design? Well, when cars started, they were driven by gasoline engines, and the engines were the heart of the car, and the whole ideal, typology of what a car looked like was based on the engine. Everybody made their own engine. Some were beautiful works of art, others not so much. But everyone had a story, and everyone said something about the car that was in it. Now we have this, whether it's a Hyundai, a Tesla, or a Volkswagen. The guts of and the heart of the car isn't the story anymore. The story is going to be what design makes of it. So it is actually a extremely important stage for design. In the past, some of the most iconic car designs were actually done by the engineers, and because you set up the proportions and everything based on the architecture of the chassis. Now the chassis can be whatever we want it to be. So it's up to us to decide what the car is going to look like. And why is the story so important? Well, we look at this car. What is it? Who makes it? What is it? What is it for? I bet you couldn't guess. When in fact, whereas I show you this one, and you know exactly what it is and why it looks like that. So the first previous sketch was one of the early design sketches on what became the Ford Mach-E, and they were initially designing it to be a modern sort of Tesla style super slipstream electric car, but they decided that didn't say anything about Ford and what Ford was, and so because their heart wasn't in it and they didn't know what the story of it was, they didn't know how to design it. So once they decided that it should be a Mustang, then it became very clear what the car looked like, and it designs itself. So you end up with, like it or don't like it, you end up with something that's very iconic that the customer can relate to, understands the story. We're moving from the old Mustang to a new Mustang, and this is where Mustang can live after the V8 engine dies. So we have a history at Hyundai too. Most of you won't recognize this car, even if you're as old as me. They never sold them in the States, but in Canada, these were everywhere when I was growing up. It was the cheapest car you could buy in Canada because Hyundai came into the Canadian market before they came into the US, and every single student had one of these things. And then, 5 years later, they all fell apart or rusted, so there were none left. So in Canada, like the early Hyundais in the US, there wasn't a sort of a strong, warm, fuzzy feeling about the car. But in Korea, this was the car that gave them mobility. This was the first car that was their own design, that was manufactured, not designed by them because it was a Giugiaro, but it was, their own design of car. Before that, Hyundai had actually manufactured Ford Cortinas under license. So they were building cars, but this was the first one that was their own car. So there's a lot of pride in Korea around this car. So much so, they've recently done an electrified, sort of resto mod on the original Pony, which is actually an earlier version of the car I showed you before. The one that we had in Canada was the facelift. So this is the original, and they took an original Pony. I saw them in the studio in Korea, and then did it all up and made it fit for the digital age, because our new electric car, the latest one that's coming out, the Ioniq 5, is a homage to the Pony. Because in Korea, the Pony meant so much to them, and to our chairman, that he wanted this car to look to the future, but also to tie in to the story of Hyundai. So we ended up designing a car that looks a bit like a Giugiaro car, although done in a different way, and super modern and interesting. So that's where story comes from, and that's why it's so important, because underneath this is a skateboard. So this could look like a Tesla. It could look like a Mustang Mach-E. It could look like a Jaguar E-Pace. They all have basically the same underpinnings, but it doesn't, because it has our story. So I'm going to now go through a bunch of projects I just grabbed. These are ones that I was personally involved in. It's just a kind of a grab bag of stuff. So we're just going to go through it and I just talk a little bit about the story behind them. So the first one was, this is like a functional inspiration I wanted to explain. So we had this picture. We started this, we were designing a van. It's the sort of Korean market commercial van, but they do a executive version of it that is a passenger. So you can get it as a panel van, you can get it as a passenger van. All the airport limos in Korea are this van, and we ride it all the time when we land in Seoul and we get picked up and we're in this van. And the current version, or the outgoing version, the new one's on sale already, has a really high belt line. And so when you're sitting in it, you feel the windows are a little bit like slots, so you don't have this open, airy feeling. So my idea, which actually came from sitting in a rooftop restaurant, a skyscraper, where the glass went floor to ceiling, was just that view, the commanding view of space that gives you. And so this photo of sorry, mine's gone in the name. Scarlett Johansson from Lost in Translation really became the icon for the car. And when we were working on it, we started working on. I was actually running the interior of it, and then through happenstance, I ended up managing the exterior from our studio too. And our interior got dumped, but our concept permeated the whole vehicle. So the idea and the story about the rooftop restaurant, the super visibility and flying above, lost in translation, permeated the whole vehicle. So you can see the final interior has an extremely low belt line. It's well below the below the shoulder of the guy. He can put his arm. It's almost the same height as the armrests. And the initial models we showed of this, it was actually even lower. You can see here we've got from early concept sketch through to the production model. It stayed very true. The very simple, smooth, clean, modern shape, super low belt line, and the idea was strong enough that it sold our design. So even though we were competing against other designs, and a lot of the design management liked some of the other designs, but our story was strong enough that it prevailed, and the van came through to production with very few changes. And here you can see, even in the advertising, our story of this super low belt line, the visibility, the friendliness is brought out into the marketing. So one story can propel the whole project through. Another one was I'm going to talk about is the stylistic inspiration. This one wasn't so much functional as stylistic. This is the Neptune, which was a fuel cell semi-truck that we showed at the National Association of Commercial Vehicles show in Atlanta in 2019. And it was inspired by the streamlined modern trains from the 30s, and you can see how once they had that image of the train, they sold the image of the train, and that made it all the way through, because the story of streamlining, of modernity, of clean, was captivating. And even though we had other designs that were competing against this one, the story of that train took on a life of its own, and that's the way the vehicle ended up. Which was interesting, because originally it was not well resolved how it was going to work, and we were trying to show this in America, so that we influenced strongly the story of how the vehicle worked and opened, and all of that was based on pretty much on the vehicle that we had designed, but it was the train story overrode that, and it ended up looking like the train. Here's some shots of the interior, which we had envisioned as a workspace interior. So it was like an apartment with a bathroom and a kitchen. And again, they ended up picking the Korean theme because they were fascinated by this halo screen. But the story of what the interior should do, from our telling of what the American market needed and what we wanted to be able to do in it, had to be reflected in the other designs, because it was so strong. Through projects, we often will use an image to help tell a story as well. So this is a show car that we did for New York for a few years ago. For a few years I was working on Genesis projects. I'm now back on Hyundai ones. But the idea with this one was this whale tone piano was such a cool form that the designer who was working on it thought that made a really a very strong impression on her, and she used that as the main character for the IP. And again, that inspiration, caught the attention and caught everybody's eyes, and the piano, we understand the piano idea. And so in the production, or not the production, but the concept car that we showed, you can still see the influence of the piano in the final design. A few other shots. And then this car was another Genesis we did at Pebble Beach, and it had a different purpose. So the GV80 concept that I just showed, its purpose was to introduce a new styling direction and show where Genesis was going to go. This one was actually brought out and shown at Pebble Beach before Genesis was a brand. But to sort of introduce the idea of what of how upmarket Genesis was going to be going, because the G90 sedan was about to come out, and this was a teaser for it. So the exterior we did is very expressive coupe form. The front graphic was similar to the production car, but the interior is essentially the production car interior. So we used the actual. We got the actual production data, and then we used actually earlier some of the design model data, because it was a little bit more exaggerated than the production car, just to make it a little more expressive for a show car. But detail for detail, you can pretty much see that it's matching the same form. So this was to introduce the car in a way that was more of just a taste rather than the actual car that was coming. So we use image boards a lot, and they can help influence a design. These were image boards that we had created for the current Santa Fe, and again, the designer was inspired by the motorcycle, the juxtaposition between the technical form of the motorcycle, the very organic rider, and then the geometric tank on the back. And she was using some of those forms in her sketching to come up with ideas. We were trying these interesting twisting surfaces on the center console, which we had removed the armrest on our earlier model, and so it was inspired by the shape of the speedboat. And then we were, being in California, we were looking at the sort of the difference between the going from the beach to the mountain, but tying in the pixelation and geometric forms, like you can see in the backpack, into the picture. So we used that as a detail influence in the model. However, once we had got the form done, it reminded me of I was sitting at my desk trying to put together the pitch for the project, and it reminded me of an A-frame wave, where you had the two waves come together and break with one peak right in the middle. So I then made the story of the car Endless Summer. So we're tying in the beaches, we're tying in the mountains. It's all about California. And so that story helped me explain the design when I was presenting it, which you can see here as the pre-facelift version of that. And so what we've got is the two waves coming and breaking in the middle. So the A-frame wave really sold the idea. And it's not that the architecture of this is anything unique. There's been lots. It's essentially like a dual cowl interior, like a Corvette had in the early 60s. But it's the way you explain it and the story you tell can help propel the design forward. And then when you look at some of the details in it, like you can see in the speaker or in the stitching in the back of the seat, the geometry pixelation from the backpack made it all the way through into the final car. And then sometimes when nobody else is available, you get to stand up and tell the story yourself. So this was me presenting the car for the North American introduction in New York. The next one we've got is the Kona, and when you see an interior of a car, you don't normally think of a single seat, almost racing car. but that's what the inspiration of this was. So if we look at this was a page we put together to show the inspiration of it. And the third image down on the left is the back mono, which is a single seat, very techy, sports car that is basically just a track toy, but it's got this flowing surfaces over very technical details. And you can see in the small sketch there that it's got these grab bars that are like suspension elements, but then draped over with the form of the instrument panel, and that was like the Bach mono. And the first design models of this actually had the suspension strut, grab bars, but all of those got costed out of the model. It lost a little bit of its spice, but you can still see that it has the basic architecture because, again, the story was there. It's the draped form over the technical details, and even down to the trim package ones get the same color accents as we were doing in our early models. Here's the Grandeur, which is a luxury or a mid-luxury Korean market sedan, and the inspiration for that was a bent shaft canoe paddle. So we're trying to do something different with the architecture of the screen. So we had the screen connected to a trim piece that goes along, and then it bends. And so the form and shape of it are very similar to the paddle. And so that was the spirit animal for this car. Now we've got a Tucson, which is just being replaced, and there's a couple of versions of this, which we did both of them. It was interesting because we did the original car, which actually was the last one that I was actually a designer on before I was a manager, and then we got a chance to fix it when we did the facelift. And so the facelift, the idea was that it was inspired by this POC hockey armor, where it's got this very nice chiseled form that comes around with it provides the protection. And that was the idea was to bring that through for the instrument panel to separate the screen from the instrument panel like the earlier one had. And it the imagery of that and story of the separation and the trim piece and putting the expensive part right in where the passenger can have it, again carried through into the final car. And there's that. And now we'll look at the original version, which was inspired by the old TWA terminal at JFK, which I think is JetBlue now, or it might have turned to a hotel. I'm not quite sure. And so that was the inspiration for the basic form and architecture of the center of it. And here are some of my sketches that I did many years ago. And then in the final, you can see in the final car, it got pretty watered down, but the basic gesture is still there. But for me, this one had lost a lot, and it got very sort of lazy looking, which is why when we were doing the facelift, we really wanted to, separate the screen, make the IP lower, make it feel wider and more sleek. This I kind of threw in for fun, which is a car we made for PlayStation. It was in Gran Turismo 4, I believe, and so it was a hydrogen powered, Le Mans car. So we had a full interior of that, which didn't get published as much, which is pretty cool because putting in, it's definitely one-seater racing, but because it's a game, you could do things that are impossible in real life. Like the speedometer is a hologram that floats in the middle of the steering wheel. Now we can get on to some of a couple of my last these are the last few projects I've got, which are a couple of ones I did when I was at Mercedes. Again, just to show how the story works and how you can tie that together. So this one, the idea of it came from a really bad little thumbnail doodle I did, which was on the bottom corner of a board, and the vice president of design from Germany came over, was in the studio, looked at the board, and of all the stuff he commented on, he pointed at the one sketch in the bottom and said in German, "Diese Skizze ist nicht hässlich," which means that sketch isn't hideous. And so that was the one that ended up being selected, and we took it all the way through to production. But it was inspired by the F-35. So the idea of the shape of with the it's almost an upside down F-35, but the way the vents are related to the trim piece. So the wings are the trim piece, and the vent is the air intakes. And so you can see that a little bit in the form. So it was very architectural, very simple, very clean. And then this was a big project for me, because this was the first car I got in production, which was super exciting. And I did this whole project from start to finish while I was living in Germany, which was pretty interesting, because I'd taken a lot of German lessons while I was living in California, and so I could actually speak German, relatively well. And while I was working on this, normally we would have a project manager who would go to all the meetings. And for most of the other foreign designers were there who didn't speak any German, the program manager would just go to the meeting, and then the designer would be moaning all the time about how engineering kept changing things on them, and they didn't know where the project was going. So whereas I spoke enough German that I would just go to the meetings, and eventually the program manager just stopped going to the meetings, and it was just me there. And I would sit there and argue with the engineers, and you have to do it like this. No, what if we did it like this? And then they'd go away and come back, a few days later. Oh, well, we can't do that, but we can do it a little bit differently. So understanding the way the engineering drawings and the packaging behind what you're doing is really important, because if you can discuss and argue with engineering on terms that they understand, then you can really make changes to things in a positive way and make your design look more like you want it to. So this was a coupe version of the S class, and my original concept was that, and the story that ended up selling my design, even though it kept changing and changing, was that the sedans in Mercedes were traditionally a cross-car theme with horizontal theme. So the wood is very horizontal, whereas the coupes were more of a vertical theme. So the wood was located in the middle, and then you had the leather on the passenger side. We had a lot of carryover to do in this car, because it was very limited volume. So many pieces had to be the same as the sedans. So my original theme had the IP was all leather on the driver's side, and I actually had round vents, and to try and make it look even more sporty. The engineers went away. The round vents were not on the package, and they went away, and they can't do it. Oh, but what if you do it like this? And eventually they came back, 3 weeks later. We can do the round vents, but by that point, we'd already decided we were going to move away from the round vents, because we didn't want to do we couldn't do a round clock. The clock had to be carryover, so the round vents and the square clock just didn't work. But the overall thing worked. And then I heard a rumor that they were thinking they might have to carry over the upper part of the instrument panel up here. So the idea I had was, what if we make a trim piece on the passenger side that's made of leather and has a seam on it, so that a stitched line on it, so that it looks like a French seam, and that way you won't read it as the same part. And I redesigned this top so that it was a little more sporty and dynamic. It was because the original sedans was a one line at the top, and it was very, formal and very simple. They ended up liking the top of this one so much that they put it in the sedan. So you can see, and we ended, we had to carry over this, but the wood architecture was totally different. But it was working with engineering to figure out how to get that. But once the idea of coupes or vertical, sedans or horizontal was sold, it was very easy to get everybody on board and what needed to be done to make it work. And we just had to work around things and adjust stuff so that the car could go together. But the idea was there and the theme stayed intact. So what's next? Well, the next stage is up to you guys, because what we have is a blank piece of paper, and it's your turn to tell the story. So everybody out there, where design is going and what the future is going to hold is completely up to you. But it's really important, because like with cars, underneath the surface, all the products are becoming much more similar. So there is as much less differentiation between function of products. So it all becomes, why should I buy this product over that? Why should I buy your widget when I can buy somebody else's? And when with the cheap knockoffs coming from other parts of the world very quickly and easily, having the story of why yours is the right product is critically important. And that's what I've got for today. So now I guess Max is going to let you guys ask some questions. But thank you very much for putting up with my rant. And I will just stop my share now.
So our first question is, when working as a team, how do you maintain the specific image that you want the vehicle to have? If different team members are working on different parts of the car, how do you make sure all those different parts come together and agree with each other? If you do.
No, that's a really good question. What we tend to do is, at an early stage of a project, while we're figuring it out, we'll have basically each designer works on their own theme. So if we're working on an interior, right now I'll say have 3 designers working on it, and we'll set a general direction, and I'll start sort of figuring out the general direction where it wants to go, and share that with everybody. But then I take their feedback and we work together, collaborating to sort of make our studio story stronger, so that what we'll do is we'll make the story from our studio a broad enough umbrella that it can cover all of the themes underneath it, so that when we present them to Korea, we're coming together as we have a pitch that works for everybody. And then as they get down selected, we can then focus that pitch and story down to be more specific to the one theme. So if there's one characteristic that really stands out, then we'll play that up when we're presenting it and talking about it. And I guess I didn't really answer the question. So let me back up and say, once we've got down to one direction, there'll be one designer whose initial idea it was, and they're basically in charge of it. And so other designers are working on parts and they have ownership of that, but they have to look at what the one who's doing the main theme, where that's going, and then make sure theirs fit into that. Does that sort of answer it?
Yeah, so that kind of almost becomes like a mini design director of that project,
Exactly.
correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
If you want to think of it that way?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Our second question is a more general or broad question. Why do concept cars, for the most part, always stay concept cars? Why do they never go into production, even though they have amazing interior, exterior designs compared to standard production cars?
Well, there's a few different types of concept cars. There's they can go from designer flights of fancy to what's basically a production car with a fancy paint job. And so depending on what, that it's next year's production car, we're just showing it with a fancy paint job and we'll call it a show car. So depending on what the purpose of the car is, that's how close it is. So what often happens, like if you look at we had pictures, if you can look up pictures of the Hyundai 45 versus the Ioniq 5, and they're not the same, but they're similar. And so what we did with that was we had already designed the Ioniq 5, and then to do a show car version, you let the designers go a little bit crazy. What would you really do if it didn't matter how much it weighed, how the aerodynamics were, whether it can meet crash requirements, whether people can get in and out of it? What would it look like? And then that's what they'll do. So the show cars are just, their purpose in life is to look cool. It doesn't mean that they'll be comfortable. It doesn't mean that they'll drive well. It doesn't mean that they'll even work. Most of them don't work at all. You're lucky. Sometimes the doors don't open properly. I mean, they have lots of, because they're not designed to be real cars. They're designed to be an image of what a car could be.
They're, if you'll forgive me, I would say that maybe they're the embodiment of inspiration for what production could be.
Yeah,
maybe
I would say that's true. Yeah, like if you're, it's like a school project a bit, right? If you're given free hand and you could do anything, and physics isn't important, and marketability isn't important, and sales import isn't important, and crash testing isn't important, what would you do, and how could you make it, what could you make it look like? And that's what you get. And and sometimes ideas can be adjusted so that they work in production, and sometimes they can't be. And so those ones, they're better left alone, because if you tried to make a production car of it, everyone would look at it and go, oh, that didn't turn out so well.
like maybe the Aztec.
Like maybe the Aztec. Well, the Aztec, I think, yeah, I mean, there was a show car version of that as well. And the problem with the Aztec, there were a couple problems with the Aztec. One was it was about 10 years ahead of its time. And the other was it was built on a minivan platform, and they had to carry over the cowl of the minivan. So if they hadn't, all of what people call SUVs today are basically the same thing as an Aztec. They're something that looks off-roady based on a car-like platform, which is what the Aztec was. So the Aztec was one of the first. Actually, the first Hyundai Santa Fe, which was also kind of weird-looking thing, was a really early version of a car-based SUV. The first Toyota Highlander was another one. And like the first Santa Fe, the first Highlander, they're a little weird looking, and because everybody's trying to figure out what should this look like. Why, Chrysler tried with the first Pacifica to make that was their version of the Aztec, also based on the minivan platform. But the packaging didn't work, and so those where everybody was trying to figure the car out. And so, yeah, the show car of the Aztec was a lot better, because you didn't have to worry about the platform.
We also have a question about your workplace.
Okay.
Are you in at Hyundai, are design sketches and renderings done by hand or digitally only now?
Um, I would say, like, hand sketches are like, like that. That's about the limit most people get to sketching on hand by hand. Is just thinking about little ideas. Everything else is digital. In fact, we're not so much even into the renderings. We're really heavy data now. So all the designers are building their own data. Our one of our most important tool right now are the goggles. We're trying out a couple of different software packages for designing and reviewing and collaborating on models in 3D. One of which is called Gravity Sketch. And there's another one that we're just testing. It's a little bit earlier in its project, but it's called Flying Shapes. It's a very cool one too. So, but that to me is where things are going. It's because the way it worked in the past was the sketch was a way for a designer to communicate their idea to management and then to a modeler to create the 3D form. So the sketch is the way it comes out of the head and gets to 3D. And so if we have another way of doing that that's more efficient and better and lets you express yourself in 3D in the first place, why not do it that way? Because it's the idea that's important. It's not the artwork. Although you have to have the artwork to get, having the artwork helps you sometimes understand the idea, and it helps you get hired.
Some of that has more, again, to do with your own story and
yes.
selling how you think more than anything.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so talking about stories tonight and how you use stories a lot for kind of pitching or selling or even developing your ideas. A student wanted to know, is it challenging to come up with the new designs, and where do you look for the inspiration when creativity gets low?
Well, I tell this story. So when I went to school in Coventry, we would have we'd have a studio class that lasted, I don't know, I can't remember, 8 weeks, something like that, whatever it was. And you would sit there and you thought a lot and you talked and you did some little bit of doodles. And so, we're designing, a new Jaguar coupe to replace the, whatever it was, XJS at the time. Dating myself here. But so, and you'd sit there and you do the little doodles and you think, and it needs to be this because of that. And so, thinking about the story a lot. And then at the end of the 8 weeks, you put up 2 sketches, a front 3/4, rear 3/4, and man, they were the most overworked. You put your heart and life and soul into them, and I look back and they're awful. But whereas I went to CCS, and at the time that was the opposite. Thinking wasn't so much a thing. So the first studio class I took there was the trends class, and we'd have the class on Tuesday and then again on Thursday. And it was Tuesday, okay guys, today we're doing T-birds. Thursday I want 10 T-birds from everybody. And again, when we'd been working in England, it was on like A3 sheets of paper about this big. At CCS, it was 20-inch by 40-inch pieces of paper. So like drawing like this. So man, it was awful. I hated it. The work I produced was the worst stuff. Nothing was right. Everything was terrible. But that was the most important class I ever took, and the most helpful, because the thinking is, the thinking I can do, and I've spent a long time talking today, but it's if you're afraid of the blank piece of paper and you don't always have an idea, if you have to always think of the idea first, then you have trouble coming up with the idea sometimes. So quite often on these, like as I was showing you on that Santa Fe one, the idea of the beach and the wave came after we had done the design, but that was the story that helped sell it. So what you need to have is the idea on paper, and then you come up. Sometimes the story comes first, sometimes the idea comes first. It doesn't really matter. They need to work together. And in the end, you use the one to sell the other. But sometimes you don't have a story and you don't have an idea. You just start drawing and see what you come up with. And then you look at that and think, oh, that could be good. Other times, what you see a lot of the time, in our studio anyway, is people will have an image. You will do an image board and we'll pick a bunch of pictures of things that we find inspiring, and then use those to do our design. Like we had one designer we were working on a project a couple months ago was looking at dams. So we found a bunch of photos of dams and the way the water flowed off the dam and the architecture of the dam. And then he basically just took that picture and then redrew it as a car interior. Literally the same dams, and they made the center console and the water flowed this way. And so because you're looking at something that is different than what you're doing, you can bring new inspiration and come up with new forms that you wouldn't have thought of, that because they're not anything to do with what you're doing. So you can use inspiration to create ideas when you don't have them, or sometimes you just draw and see where the lines go, and then that can lead to inspiration.
Great. Yeah, I remember some of those classes, Andrew. They were pretty torturous.
Yeah, but useful. Not afraid of the blank piece of paper anymore.
Absolutely.
That's why I was thinking about that. That's why I ended on the blank sheet of paper like that, because I was thinking about that.
Perfect.
That anecdote had popped into my head earlier today, and so I thought, oh, I need to finish on a blank piece of paper, because the open book, because the story is an open book.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So as a design manager, do you still do design work yourself, or do you mainly oversee your team? If not, do you miss it?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Different people are different. I still strongly influence the design, and I can drive the design where I want it to go. But what I personally, I don't ever compete against my designers. There's some people like doing that. I personally don't feel that that's appropriate, because my job isn't, I mean, if you're hiring me to draw something for you, then you're not doing the right thing, because the kids are coming out of school right now can draw circles around me. But I can look at things and understand how to make it happen better than they can, but I would never have thought of what they drew. So I don't want to draw anymore. I love design and I love problem solving. Which is probably what drove me to interiors more than exteriors. Although I've been dabbling with exteriors lately, and I like that still. But exteriors is like a sculpture, whereas interior is like a whole bunch of products that have to fit together, and so you're solving it like it's a puzzle you're trying to solve. And that's the part that I've always found fascinating, that I've really enjoyed. And so I still do that. And I'll work with the designers and I'll help them. And right now we're doing everything remotely. So we're doing, we were using Zoom a lot because Zoom is great, but we're not allowed to anymore. But we would have, everybody's work up on the screen, and I just start marking it up, and I draw right over their work in Zoom or WebEx. And then so they can see what I'm doing, and whether that's a 3D model or a 2D picture, I can influence it that way. I'll grab their data and move things around and adjust it. And when push comes to shove, if something needs to get done, I'll do it. But mostly I try to support what the designers need and sort of help direct it where I think it needs to go, and be the bridge between the upper management and the designers to try and sort of dampen the be the damper in the process instead of the spring.
It's interesting. I think being a design manager, you are still a designer. Your tools are just different. Now your
Right.
tools incorporate your actual designers.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like my ultimate boss, who is Luke Donkervolke, who's the, he's the CDO. in charge of Hyundai and Genesis and Kia. And, you know, he sets the final direction. So, you know, he steers the super tanker, you know, and that's his job. He's at the tiller of the super tanker, and it's like, okay, we're going this way. No, now we need to go that way. And so that's his job. And then the next under him is then, you know, each person does the next step to make sure that the super tanker is going in the right direction. And everybody, if the person at the bottom isn't listening to what's happening at the top, then it doesn't work. So everybody has to work together to get this thing pointed where it is. And everybody on the way down that uses their experience and intuition and design sense to direct things where they think it needs to go to get it where the, you know, the company's decided to go.
Interesting analogy, because doesn't Hyundai make super tankers as well?
Well, not our part of it, but yes.
Okay, we have not a question, but it's a nice visual touch that the painting in your background is also about cars.
Oh yeah, it's a Tintin. So
yeah,
well, we're in Zoom so much. I thought that was a kind of a fun picture, so it ties the cars together. So
one of our first guest speakers of the semester or the season, if you will, mentioned basically designing your space, you know, as to your box. This is your box.
Yeah,
it should say something about you.
Yeah,
or it will, regardless.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Well, and at least with it being Zoom on this, you can curate what's inside the camera's view. So.
Right. Exactly. Okay. How is it working closely with other countries, like working with Korea while at Hyundai? Does working at a global level present any pros or cons?
You know, it depends. If you, you know, in the past, when we were flying a lot, if you like travel and flying and seeing different places, then it's great. Some people like it, some people don't like it. I've moved around a lot. I like traveling. I like seeing places, so that's fine for me. The challenge is always everything ends up being a little bit of a game of broken telephone. So because you're so far away, you know, like when we come online right when Europe is going home, and then work till Korea starts in the morning. So this week we've had to have meetings with Europe and Korea and us at the same time. And so it's like 10 o'clock at night for us, 5 in the morning for Germany, and, you know, in the middle of the day in Korea. So that poses challenges, which we didn't used to deal with as much because we would travel to Korea all the time and we used to have the meetings there. But, you know, for me right now, it's not so bad having to stay up a little bit late every now and then and have a video conference instead of having to get on a plane for 15 hours. So.
Most definitely.
I guess
our world has
I guess one more time
changed quite a bit that way.
The other thing is what's also interesting is, you know, dealing with different cultures is people deal with things differently. And when I started at Hyundai, they had a, you know, cultural training a little bit to teach, you know, to help, you know, sort of, but it was very interesting for me because you have the two I've worked closely with, Germans and Koreans, are diametrically opposite. So the Germans are no context in what they say, and Koreans are 99% context. So you ask a German, what, you know, do you like this? And they'll say yes or no, and then you know, and they'll, you know, be very abrupt and straightforward, and that's all there is. And it's, you know, it is, I like it, I don't like it, move on to the next one, I like it, I don't like it. The Koreans will never say no. They'll say, ooh, difficult, which is shorthand for no. And you don't, in Germany, you have stuff in the meeting and you go to the meeting and all the decisions are made. In Korea, a lot of the decisions are done, you have these pre-meetings and pre-meetings and pre-meetings. So all of the main decisions are made, so that at the final day, everybody agrees and we have consensus. So it's all about consensus building, and so that everybody's brought along and together. But and Americans are somewhere in the middle. So Americans, that, you know, when you're talking with the Germans, Americans will, you know, you're presenting the thing and the Germans say, no, that's crap. And then the American's like, oh, he hates me. It's like, no, he doesn't hate you. He thinks that's crap. You show him something else next week he likes. Oh, I love it. It's great. So, and then you know, with the Americans, with the Koreans, are always wanting to get a straight answer. Is it a yes or is it a no? And it's like, well, you don't want that answer, because right now it's a, you know, I'm not giving you a full answer. So you have ability to do what you want to do. If you force it an answer, you'll get an answer, but you probably won't like it. And then once you've got the answer, it's fixed. So you have to learn how to work in the gray area. So, I mean, you know, do you know, remember Andre Hudson, Max?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Andre had a lot of trouble with gray area in Koreans. So he always wanted a straight answer, and he could never get one, and it always frustrated him.
Yeah, I think that could be, those types of cultural challenges when it comes to creativity, I'm sure is really hard for certain people to navigate, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, yeah, like Hyundai can be a very difficult place to work. A lot, you know, you have to have the mindset for it. You know, we've had some people thrive and last a long time. Other people can't stand it and wash out in weeks. You know, I've had designers quit after a couple months because they just could not stand it. But if you can work with it, you can move things around and do a lot of stuff. But you have to be willing to sort of just go with the flow.
Sure. Kind of as a tag on to this cultural learnings, if you will, do you think your multiple cultural background influences your work a lot? And if so, how?
Well, you know, I think it does. I mean, because I can look at stuff just about everywhere as a bit of an outsider. So, you know, what's interesting when you you know, in Canada, when you're looking at, you know, Canada is up to date on absolutely everything that goes on in the US, you know, absolutely focused on whatever's happening in the US. Whereas, you know, Americans don't care what happens in Canada, because it's not important to America what happens in Canada. Whereas to Canadians, it's extremely important what happens in America, because America is so big that it drastically affects everything. And so you come in here and, you know, I had certainly had, you know, prejudices and, you know, preconceived ideas of what US was and wasn't before I lived here. And it's not what I thought it was. And, you know, in some ways, some things are exactly what I thought they were. Other things are quite different. And same with living in Germany, and same with living in Britain. I mean, for me, what's interesting, you know, even from moving, you know, from Michigan to California is like a different country. You know, in a lot of ways, my wife and I found when we were living in Germany is much more like Canada than California is. Although on paper you would expect this is part of North America, everybody speaks English, you know, this should be more similar. But in a lot of ways, Canada is more like Germany than it is like California. So, but it's not the same. Germany's got its own little quirks. But it's interesting, you know, and you learn new things, and the more things you know, and the more things you learn, the more you can talk about different topics and have different ideas and different opinions, and just be open to things. You know, design is all about sponging up ideas from wherever you can. So you want to be as broadly experienced as you can be, I think.
That's very good advice. We have a student that wants to know, does the Hyundai Design Studio offer tours to industrial design students?
Not often, no. We don't. You'll find all of the car studios are pretty tightly tied up secret. I mean, we don't even, when we're interviewing people to come and work for us, they don't get to see inside the studio until we've hired them. So there's really no there's no possibility of tours. I mean, what you got is the video I showed you. That's the tour.
Now that seems pretty much like the back end of military and the automotive industry have about the same level of secrecy.
Yeah, I don't think you'll find any car studio that you could get a tour of. The only, I mean, occasionally they'll do, sometimes they would do open houses and stuff. It's happened occasionally in the past, but not very often. And generally, the only time they'll do it is maybe if they've opened a brand new building. Just before they move in, they'll have an open house and show it off before anything secret's happening. But once there's projects in there, you just don't want people in there. So. We don't even let
see the lobby.
Sorry, the people at you get to the lobby. The people at who work for like Hyundai America, the sales and marketing, they can only come in guided with us. They don't have access to our building. It's completely locked.
On that, how long does it take from concept to production in general for Hyundai?
Well, for us, we're about like 3.5 years, something like that. Mercedes is more like 7. So, I mean, the both of the Mercedes I designed, I was working at Hyundai before they went on sale. So it varies from company to company, but I think, Hyundai's on the extreme end of short and Mercedes is on the extreme end of long. So everybody's somewhere in the middle.
Gotcha. With intense competition coming from universities like CCS and Art Center, automotive design has a reputation of being one of the most challenging design realms to break into. With that in mind, what is the best way to be noticed in applications and portfolios if you're applying for an internship or junior design position?
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, again, it comes back, I sound like a broken record, but it comes back to story, and what Art Center and CCS give you is a story. I've been to Art Center. We know what the school, what to expect coming out of those schools. That they've gone through this and they've got what it needs to qualify as a car designer. The biggest challenge generally for people who are not brought up through Art Center and CCS and the like is the drawing, because the car design is much more about and I contradict myself a little bit from earlier, but I say we're driving, everything's very digital, but the way through the door still passes through sketching for the most part. Although that is starting to change, and if you have a very strong, digital portfolio, building stuff in 3D, and you can show that off, that can overcome a lot of the sketching. In fact, even going back, when Max and I were in school, I don't even want to say how many years ago, my pitch was that I was the digital guy. There weren't many doing that at the time, and so my sketching wasn't the best, but I was by far and away the most advanced of anybody in my class anyway. In fact, I ended up teaching them all how to use Alias. So that was what I used to sell myself to make me stand out from everybody else. So you want to stand out from the crowd, but it's, the difficult part is, going to a school like Art Center or CCS for automotive design is like a pressure cooker. So you're forced to compete with these students that are obsessed with doing this car design thing, and it's your odds of getting into a car studio are somewhat like a kid who wants to play basketball in the NBA. There's not many jobs there. And so the bar to get those jobs is really high because there's so many people wanting to do it. And so it's really difficult if you haven't come through the schools that are actually training that to understand what level your stuff needs to be at. The brutally honest.
I think that's
yeah.
It's a pretty fair. I would say creating the story yourself and showcasing, if you do have that level of commitment, you have to show it. It's not going to come from
right. And it's not, but in the just the difficult part is even, is getting the right the right aesthetic twist to it, and just learning. There's a lot of tricks, and so if you know the tricks, things get a lot easier, but it's hard to learn the tricks if you're not being taught them. So it's a high bar, I would say. And I think if that's something some of you are interested in doing, it's probably worth trying. You have Art Center nearby. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to pitch Art Center, but I would recommend taking
continuing our education or finding the right path is really what's important.
Yeah, and I would take a like a intro to trans class there. If that's something you really want to do, try it out, see how it goes. Talk to the teachers who teach that are working car designers. So that's what you get the exposure to them. They're used to looking at what car designers do, and they can give you guidance whether what you're doing is going in the right direction or not going in the right direction. And one of those classes isn't so much money to take for one semester, and so that then you can decide what's the best path for you. And it doesn't have to be, we've had people that have gone, and we did a sponsored project with Cleveland Institute of Art. They do a little bit of automotive stuff, but again, when I looked at the stuff they're doing, there was some stuff that was really good, but the level was not the same as I'd find at CCS and Art Center. So a student going there has a higher bar to try and get to the level. And it doesn't mean they haven't. There's some fantastic designers that have come out of that school. There's fantastic designers that have come out of RISD. So it's not that you have to go to one of those schools, but that gives you the brand name to put the patch. It's like you've got your Gucci badge on the shoulder. So everybody, oh, okay, they like Gucci. We like Gucci. I don't like Gucci. I like Calvin Klein or whatever.
I've definitely found that for particular industries, specifically automotive, also entertainment and toy, there are programs that give you that heads up and put you in with that. So if you may be a standout, but everybody is a standout in those programs to stay in those programs.
And for example, for like me, I was desperate as a child to do car design. Growing up in Canada, in Toronto, it's I would go to the guidance counselor in the high school and say I want to do car design, and they're like, what? Well, you should do engineering. I'm like, no, it's not engineering. I know that much. And so I looked at there's a few industrial design schools in Canada, but I knew that was not going to get me to where I wanted to go. So I applied to them as a fallback, but I was lucky because I had a friend of my grandfather's in Scotland worked for what was British Leyland at the time, and then became Rover, and then it became part of BMW, and now the only part of it that's left is Mini. But so he put me in touch with the design department there, and I wrote them a letter, and we actually went and met one of the guys when we were in Scotland one time, and so they gave me a list of all the schools. So I knew that there was Art Center in Pasadena. There was actually Art Center in Switzerland at the time. there was CCS. There was there's one there's one in France. I didn't know about that at the time. There's one in Germany, and there's one in Switzerland, and then there's Royal College of Art. It was Coventry. So I looked at those options, and I thought, well, the one that seems to be the best fit for me was Coventry, because RCA was a post grad, and then I, as I said earlier, didn't want to come to America, and I thought I would be easier to work in Europe. So that's what I did, and then I didn't get in the first time I tried. So I did a foundation course for a year in England, and then tried again, and then I got accepted the second time, and then so I'm working through that, and then as I said, I was back in Canada at Christmas one year, and went to the Detroit Motor Show, and saw all of the stuff. The CCS had a booth at the show, and I looked at the artwork, and it's like, this stuff is better than the grad show that Coventry just did. The ones who were graduating, and this is much better artwork. Toured the school, they had the computers. I was really interested in that. So then I got back, and then I realized, I didn't really get along with the staff there, and the most important part of this program was to do an internship, because you had to do an internship to graduate. And what happened was, the ones who got the good internships got jobs, and the ones who didn't get the good internships didn't get jobs. And so there was one actually, funnily enough, it was with Mercedes. So I thought, okay, there weren't many people interested in that one. I think that one sounds cool. I'd love to go do that. So I applied for that one. There were two of us. They gave it to the other guy. And so at that point I said, okay, screw this, I'm out of here. So I applied to CCS, got accepted, went home for the summer, and then never went back again, because I decided what was important for me was, this is what I wanted to do. It was all I wanted to do. And, I was going to find the right path to get me to where I wanted to be. And whatever I had to do to get there was what I was going to do. So, and that obsession is what drives kids who play soccer in third world country, in South America, kids who play baseball in the Caribbean, kids who play basketball in inner cities in the US. That obsession is what drives them and gets them to those leagues. And so, yeah, talent's an important part of it, but obsession is more important, because you will do anything to make it happen. And so, and unfortunately, car design doesn't pay quite as well as basketball, hockey, or soccer. But
that would be nice.
I picked the wrong obsession.
Okay, so we've got a couple more quick questions. We know you've got to get out of here pretty soon. Last couple questions is, what do you see younger designers leaning towards in car design that is different from what was made in the past?
Well, I think it's not that. What happens is, young designers, when they come in, we have a saying, kind of, they don't know what they don't know. So they don't know what's possible and what's not possible. So you will try things that aren't possible. And as somebody who's been working for a long time, I would never think of that, because my first thought is, how am I going to make it? And so I would never draw something, and then they'll draw something, and they're like, and you're looking at it, oh, that's cool. And if we just did this and this and this and this to it, it could work. So that's the key. And that's why, for car design, it's really a young person's business, because the young people are coming in fresh out of school with all sorts of crazy ideas, and we'll come up with something, and it's like, oh, I hadn't thought of that. I'd never thought about that. So that's what's interesting. And what's changing, as with car design, is it's less about how the car is powered. Well, it's less about the mechanical bits inside the car, and more about what you want the car to do. Because underneath now, going forward, they're all going to be the same. It's all going to be a stack of batteries. Is where you put the batteries, or where you put the hydrogen tanks. there's not going to be any gas motors anymore. Those are going away soon. We're still working on gas cars. We are not quite on the last gas car yet, but some of the gas cars we're working on are the last generation of that car being in gas. So
we're looking at Hyundai in a decade, relatively.
You're looking at everybody in a decade is going to be pretty much transitioned to electric cars. Cool. I think the U.S. is a bit of a fault, a trailer. Actually, Japan is a bit of a trailer, but China, Europe, their gas cars are going to be gone.
Well, you heard it here first, guys. Other than mastering storytelling, is there something in specific you think young car designers should master before they get into the industry?
I kind of think we covered that one a little bit already, but
yeah, I think so.
But drawing is really important. Ideas are really important, and now the 3D stuff is really important. But it's the passion is everything, and the passion will drive you to where you need to be. But like I said, for me, the drawing was always my kind of my weak point, and so I needed to be somewhere like CCS that forced me to be able to draw well enough to get in the door.
So if you're not going to a CCS or an art center, practice.
Like figure drawing is great. Figure drawing is great practice for car design. Being able to, the human body is a fabulous reference for automobiles.
All right. So looks like our last question of the night is, why might the same car look different in other countries? The student was looking at a Mercedes C300 and saw the grille was shaped different,
right,
in the US model.
Well, so what happens is every market. Well, the U.S. is a bit of a regulatory island, I would say. The rest of the world has fairly consistent rules about lighting, crash safety, bumper standards, et cetera, et cetera. So you can make one car and it can look basically the same in every market except for North America, because Canada and the US use a fairly harmonized set of standards. They're not 100% the same. There's slight differences between the two, but generally Canada and the US are harmonized. Mexico is a fence sitter. You can sell cars there with US requirements or European requirements. So what happens is so the US requirements generally mean bigger bumpers and different lighting. And so you have to do a different version for the US generally, because it's not worth, you can, some of the lighting stuff is incompatible with each other, and some of the bumper stuff is incompatible with each other. So sometimes they can look similar, sometimes they have to look different. So you'll find on most of the Mercedes cars, the rear bumper is different on American models than on European models, because it's got a bigger offset, because the crash standard is different on the bumpers. It's not as different as it used to be, but it's still different enough that they usually will have to do a different skin. They used to re-engineer all the structure underneath and keep the same skin, but it's cheaper to make a new skin than it is to put all the crash stuff in under the existing skin. So what that means is if I make a special edition car, like in Germany, say I'm making the super AMG version of a C300. And and in Europe, they like, well, we can use that for example, they like station wagons a lot in Europe. So you can buy AMG station wagons in Europe and for every model. But to make that car certified to the US, you have to change a whole bunch of stuff and then recertify the car. So different crash tests, different this, different that, different next thing. So if you're only going to sell 10 of them, you're never going to make your money back. So you have to sell a lot of them in the US to make it worth engineering it for the US. Whereas if you want to sell it in Mexico, you ship, one person in Mexico wants a C300 AMG station or C, whatever it would be, 63 AMG station wagon. You ship one over, they buy it, you make money because you don't have to do anything to the car. And if somebody's willing to pay for whatever you're willing to offer it, that you can sell it. Whereas to bring it to the US, it would cost twice as much money, but if you're only selling 10 of the cars. So what they end up doing is, since they have to do changes often to the fascias and to the lighting, like you'll find here now, it used to be most of the German cars had orange turn signals in the rear and red brake lights, which is required everywhere in the world except North America. But now what's happened is the lighting regulations actually have diverged a bit. And so they're going to do a different special tail lamp for America anyway. So they just make them cheaper. They make them all red. So instead of having to have the different colored LEDs, they just make them all red, and they like them here anyway that way. And so instead of having the fancy animated flashing like they can do in Europe, they all flash at the same time. You've got all these 5 different elements all flashing at the same time, which looks a bit weird because in Europe, each of those elements does a different function. But they don't have to here, so they just make them cheaper. And then on the fronts, if you're doing it, again, because you're wanting to make sure you sell the most, the marketing will put in, and usually what will happen is they'll have there's a couple of different grills, and in Germany you can order any of them, but they'll only sell one of them here because they want to simplify the model lineup, because also people in America like buying the car off the lot. So in America, you want to go to the lot, you want to see the one there, and I want that one, and I want it tonight. And so you sit there and haggle with the dealer, and then you drive home. In Germany, you go to the book and you look through, and okay, I want this option, and I want that one, and I want this with it, and you order it like, I want the top engine, but I want cloth seats and manual wind-up windows, which you would never get in the US, because the dealer would get that thing and say, what the hell am I going to do with this car? No one's going to take it. So they want to be able to move the cars around to dealers here. So you get limited color options, you get limited option, packages, so that the cars are fairly consistent. So it doesn't matter which dealer they end up at, they can sell them all. So that's why US cars look different in the long answer. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think you've definitely given us a good insight as to kind of how the market side of the car industry works, and how that affects what you guys end up having to do.
Yeah.
Andrew, I want to thank you very much for spending the time with us tonight and giving us insights into both the auto industry as well as kind of your story and how story is important to design in general.
Cool. Yeah, and I think that the reason I focused on the story part was that's applicable to everything in design. And maybe everybody doesn't use it quite as strongly, but like if you're designing, dishwashers or refrigerators, why am I buying a $5,000 Bosch one or Viking one instead of a $500 Samsung? What's the why should I buy that one? And it's you have the story that comes with it. There's always something, it does this better and it's got that, or even the Samsung's got a big TV screen in it so that you can see what's inside your fridge without opening the door. I don't know why you need that, but it's a story. And so I think it's everything now is like that. Underneath the guts, they're all the same. There might be some special widget this one has, but that widget's not worth as much as they're wanting extra, you to pay for it, but you're buying into it because you buy the story and you buy the brand.
Yeah, I think story is highly applicable to
Yeah,
all areas of design for
right.
sure, for
Yeah.
sure.
And it can
Great.
make your design stick in someone's head better. So, and that's the whole point, is to make your design memorable. So you tell them a story, they get hooked on the story, and then of course the design has to look like that because of the story. Whereas if you just show them the sketch, they're like, they can like the sketch or don't like the sketch, but they're not invested in it. But you bring them along for a ride, tell them the story, they're invested in it, and then they see your sketch and you're like, oh, of course that's the right one because it answers the story.
I think one of the student questions was, other than mastering storytelling, I think that's really one of the key points. As a designer, you're already visually storytelling.
Right.
Is that how do you continue that story through verbiage and other inspirational cues?
Right. How do you hook the people to come along and buy what you're selling?
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Thank you, Andrew. I think it's a good time for you to be able to still make your meeting.
Yeah, no, that's perfect.
And awesome. Tell Eric said hello.
Yeah, we'll
Have
do.
a great rest of your evening.
Yeah, thanks very much. You too. And I'll just hit the button.
Thank you.